Hey everyone, it's Gladys Strickland, who writes as GB Strickland on my adventure thrillers. And I'm here today to give you the list of books I read in 2023 that I would recommend for you. I'll start out by saying not all of these books were released in 2023, but they were ones that I read during the past 12 months. So take a look. I've got details down below. Maybe you can find something for your next read. The first book is Catacomb by J.F. Penn. This is actually a novella. It's a shorter book, but still definitely worth your time. And here's the description. Beneath the streets of Edinburgh, an ancient evil waits. Each year, the Grinslow, a historic monster of insatiable hunger, demands a human sacrifice in exchange for the city's continued prosperity. A secret society known only as the Cobble has overseen this sinister ritual for centuries, binding Edinburgh to a grim legacy of terror. When ex-military search and rescue officer Walker Kane's estranged daughter Emily is taken to sate the Grinslow's appetite, he plunges into a race against time through a treacherous underworld of danger. Now, this has elements of horror in it, which is not something I would normally read, but one, I'm a fan of J.F. Penn and her other works, especially her Arcane series, and two, I love Edinburgh. I've been to the city a couple of times and really enjoyed it. So those are things that kind of drew me into it. It is a gripping tale. It is hard to put down because you want to see how it's going to end. So put that one on your list. Next is No Good Deed by J. Robert Kennedy. And this is one of his James Acton thriller books. It's actually number 30 in the series. And here's the description. In pre-World War II Austria, 9-year-old Daniel's innocence is shattered when the Nazis march into his homeland unopposed, forcing his Jewish parents to make an impossible choice to save him from an inevitable fate. And today, when archaeology professor James Acton and Laura Palmer are invited to a charity event in Vienna by the man who bought her late brother's company years ago, they eagerly accept, for it is the philanthropic event of a lifetime. In a gala to be televised around the world, the billionaire will donate the bulk of his wealth to various causes before he dies. But when the climatic transfer is about to occur, the unthinkable happens. And in the chaos that ensues, the professors see something they shouldn't. And with so much at stake, they decide to take action, once again putting their lives at risk for the sake of others. One of the wonderful things I enjoy about J. Robert Kennedy's books is he has two timelines going. One, the earlier historic one that sets up the events that the modern one has to deal with. So you get a glimpse of the history that was happening at an earlier time and then how that manifests now. It is full of action, adventure, art, history, intrigue, all the things that I enjoy in a good book, and I think you will too. Next is The Ark Files by Luke Richardson, and this is the first book in the Eden Black archaeological thriller series. Here's the blurb. Professional treasure hunter Eden Black is no stranger to action. After all, the artifacts she spends her life returning to their rightful owners aren't always easy to access. When Eden's father dies in a plane crash, her life's turned upside down. Grief turns to fear when she learns that it wasn't an accident. Everyone involved in an archaeological dig 20 years ago has met with a similar, untimely end. Everyone, that is, but Eden, who was 10 at the time. When her father's house is raided and burned to the ground, Eden is forced into action. To learn the truth about her father's death and save herself from sharing his fate, Eden must uncover the manuscript and expose its secrets once and for all. But this time the world is watching, and not everyone is on her side. When I first read the description of this book, the fact the protagonist is an archaeologist intrigued me because in my Sarah Walker series, I have academics. I have an art historian and an archaeologist who are some of the main characters. Eden Black, though, turns out not just to have an archaeological background, but quite a military type self-defense. She can get in and out of places. She knows weapons. She knows how to use them. This book is full of action. It is non-stop action. Just when you think you're going to get a little break, something else happens. And I encourage you to give this book a read. I'm looking forward to reading more books in this series, and I think you would enjoy it as well. The next book I want to recommend is The Vatican Secret, which is Joe Mason, Book 1 by David Leadbeater. Here's the description. When ex-MIS operative Joe Mason is sent to Rome to guard an elderly professor and his daughter, he thinks he's in for an easy ride. But on their first day in the Vatican secret archives, a masked assassin gains entry, shoots Joe's client in cold blood, and steals an ancient manuscript. Giving chase, Joe can't imagine what could lie within those pages that would make someone willing to kill. The search for answers leads Joe and his comrades in a race against time, across continents and into treacherous mountains. Only they have a hope of rescuing the Vatican Book of Secrets before a centuries-old enemy can succeed in bringing Rome and the world as we know it crashing down. This is another adventure full of action, taking place across numerous locations around the globe. I especially enjoyed the part in Vatican City and Rome, having been there myself. But even the descriptions of the other locations drew me in and kept me reading pages. And the characters that are working with Joe Mason, it's kind of a motley crew that comes together at the last minute, but they learn to work together in order to try to get to the bottom of all that's going on. I think you'll like it. The next book I want to recommend is The Viking Deception by J. Robert Kennedy. And this is another one in the James Acton series. So yes, I read 2 of his books last year, enjoyed them both thoroughly. Here's the description. In 989 AD, when informed of her impending arranged marriage, Fatima takes drastic action with her forbidden lover, Viking Prince Magnus, actions that not only have immediate consequences for her entire family, but reverberate a millennium later. When archaeology professor James Acton receives an invitation from a friend to visit a new dig site where an unusual artifact has been discovered linking the Vikings to the Islamic Caliphate, he and his wife eagerly accept. But upon arriving in Stockholm, Sweden, their friend is nowhere to be found, last seen entering the Saudi embassy and not heard from since. Before they can notify authorities, Acton receives a disturbing phone call and is forced into action to save his friend, becoming a criminal in the process. What fascinated me so much about this story is the artifact is a ring, a Viking ring that had been discovered, and inside was an inscription that said, "To Allah." What on earth was a Viking ring doing with an inscription to Allah? Now, J. Robert Kennedy has created a story around this, but the fact remains that ring was actually found. There was somehow a connection between the Vikings and the Islamic world, and that is what kept me so interested in this story. What could have happened? And the story that Kennedy gives us is certainly an intriguing one. Lots of action and adventure as always. James Acton and Laura Palmer cannot seem to avoid getting caught up in situations like this and using their intelligence, skills, and connections to get themselves out. So give it a read. Now I want to share with you some books that I read last year that are set in historical settings. So the historian in me loves learning about different time periods and places, and these books delivered on it. The first one is A Girl Like You, a Henrietta and Inspector Howard historical mystery by Michelle Cox. And this is the first in that series. Here's the description. Henrietta von Harmon works as a 26 girl at a corner bar on Chicago's northwest side. It's 1935, but things still aren't looking up since the big crash and her father's subsequent suicide, leaving Henrietta to care for her antagonistic mother and younger siblings. Henrietta is eventually persuaded to take a job as a taxi dancer at a local dance hall. And just when she's beginning to enjoy herself, the floor matron turns up dead. When aloof Inspector Clive Howard appears on the scene, Henrietta agrees to go undercover for him and is plunged into Chicago's grittier underworld. Meanwhile, she's still busy playing mother hen to her younger siblings, and as well as to pesky neighborhood boy Stanley, who believes himself in love with her and keeps popping up in the most unlikely places, determined to keep Henrietta safe, even from the inspector, if need be. Despite his efforts, however, and his penchant for messing up the inspector's investigation, the lovely Henrietta and the impenetrable inspector find themselves drawn to each other in most unsuitable ways. So this is a classic murder mystery, whodunit, trying to figure out the case with a ever-expanding cast of characters, and it's set in Depression-era Chicago, and not the nice part of town either. So you get to meet a lot of characters who are less than seemly. And the relationship between Henrietta and the inspector, it can be very frustrating at times because you're like, would you just not say how you're feeling about the other person? And I think a part of that is the time period and also the social class, because they're from different social classes, but also a part of it's just the characters' personalities. So you'll have to read to see what happens, and it will be worth it. The next book I want to recommend that's a historical novel is A Murder in Mayfield by Celina Grace. If you follow me for a while, you may know that Celina Grace also writes some police procedural books, the Kate Redmond series, which I absolutely love. That's how I first discovered her. And at the back of one of the books, she put one of her historical mysteries in there as well. And I fell in love with them also. So I read both of her genres that she writes in. So let me give you the description of A Murder in Mayfield. It is 1936. Undercook Joan Hart and lady's maid Verity Hunter are back in London after a long stay in the country. The capital is fraught and unsettled. Protests and riots are taking place regularly. Fascism is on the rise, and trouble in Europe is brewing. But the girls are still thrilled to be back in the big smoke, ready for some fun and frivolity. That is, until an old friend of Verity's contacts the servant sleuths, asking for help. Maidservant Thetis Samuels was the only one in the house when tycoon Sir Jacob McMullen was killed, and things are looking very black for her, unless Joan, Verity, and their old ally Inspector Marks might be able to help. The time period is similar to the previous one, mid-30s, although now we're in London instead of the United States. But it still gives you great insight into the social classes of the time, because our two female sleuths are servants in a house, a grand house, several houses for that matter. It also gives you insight into some of the historical events going on at the time, changes, the rise of fascism, things like that. But underlying it all is a good mystery. Who killed this man? If it wasn't his maid, who did it? And it also involves the woman they work for, so there's a lot of intrigue there, suspense, a good book. You'll enjoy it. Next is The Night Portrait by Laura Morelli. Laura Morelli is an art historian by training and infuses all of her books with a lot of art and history, which of course I love. Let me read you the description for this one. Milan, 1492. When a 16-year-old beauty becomes the mistress of the Duke of Milan, she must fight for her place in the palace and against those who want her out. Soon she finds herself sitting before Leonardo da Vinci, who wants to ensure his own place in the ducal palace by painting his most ambitious portrait to date. Munich, World War II. After a modest conservator unwittingly places a priceless Italian Renaissance portrait into the hands of a high-ranking Nazi leader, she risks her life to recover it, working with an American soldier, part of the famed Monuments Men team, to get it back. Two women separated by 500 years are swept up in the tide of history as one painting stands at the center of their quests for their own destinies. The painting in question in this book is an actual portrait that Leonardo did, the lady with an ermine, so you can look it up and see what that is. And it's fascinating, the story that could have been around this. Like, we know the woman, we know she was the mistress to the Duke, but we don't know any of her personal story. And not only do we get her story, we get a lot of Leonardo's story, because the book is told from her point of view, Leonardo's, and then jumping to World War II, we have a character there who is sharing her story to try to reclaim this painting from the Nazis. Intrigue on all levels, a fascinating story, and one that I think you would enjoy. Next up is an anthology I read titled Loosed Upon the World, the Saga Anthology of Climate Fiction by various artists, including Margaret Atwood, and it is edited by John Joseph Adams. During the summer, I got really interested in reading climate fiction. I think a lot of it is news you keep hearing about climate change, climate impacts. Living in Florida, we definitely can feel that during hurricane season, although thankfully this year for us was pretty mild. But I just wanted to read, but didn't necessarily want to read a bunch of books. So I found this anthology of short stories and really enjoyed it. It covers a variety of scenarios, it taking place in different locations with very interesting characters and different challenges they each face. This is a book you could look at and go through and just pick out some stories that interest you, or you might want to read the whole thing like I did. But certainly look it up and see what you think. And finally, I had a couple of pieces published this year. I'm really excited about that. First of all, I had an essay published in this anthology, Joy to the World, edited by Terry Kalfas. My essay is entitled A Train Set for Christmas, and it tells the story of the year when I was nearly 30 when I gave my dad a train set for Christmas. And it explains why I did and what his reaction was. But since it's about joy at Christmas, I think you'll get an idea that he was quite pleased. And the second work I published was on my blog this year, and it is entitled A House on the Hill. And here's a little blurb of that. After midnight in a storm, a couple has a flat tire on a deserted road. With no phone signal, their only hope is the house on the hill. This story began with a prompt to write about a scary house that wasn't haunted. That's where the story began, but it took some twists and turns along the way, and there'll be a link in the description if you want to go to my blog and read that. All right, so those are my reading recommendations from 2023. I hope you can find something good to read. Notes on all the books are in the description below, the title of the author, where you can purchase them, different things like that. I want to also encourage you, you don't have to buy the book. Check with your library and see if it's available for checkout in ebook, print book, or maybe even audiobook. because that is still a great way to support any author that you like by using the library, and supporting a library is always a wonderful thing. I'll be doing another list in 2024. I've got a stack of books that I've recently purchased at a used bookstore that I'm going to start digging through, and I hope you'll join me again. If you like this, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel, where I'll be posting not only reading recommendations and tips for readers, but also a lot of the art and history that goes into my fiction work. So until next time,